May I speak in the name of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Before I begin my sermon this morning, I would commend to you the first two words sung by the choir in the gospel acclamation. Yeah, you've spotted it. And those of you who haven't are now looking at your service sheets. Stay awake. Today, in our gospel reading, we discover yet again the subject of the second coming. That is at the heart of this sermon delivered by Jesus to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, and known as the Olivet Discourse. We are told that signs of the end times will be marked with wars and conflicts and natural disasters. And there are some people today who seem to spend all their time looking for these signs, and who seriously believe that we are beginning the progression towards the end of the world. However, we must stop interpreting world events as milestones leading up to the end. Jesus specifically warned us against doing this in his sermon that day on the Mount of Olives. Mark 13, 7-8 reads, and I know you know it because you've just heard it. When you hear of wars and rumours of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. It's not now. It is still to come. Thank you for the ambulance or the police or the fire engine going past at that moment. Took me ages to arrange that. Jesus told his disciples, and he is telling us, beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, I am he. And they will lead those many astray. We must not be led astray by those who speak doom and gloom and the end of the world. We must not listen to the false prophets. There have been many false prophets throughout history who foretold the end of the earth. If we go back just a few years, in fairly recent times, there have been the so-called prophets who were sure that the world was going to end in a big explosion when we hit the year 2000. It was foretold that all the computers in the world were going to blow up and the world as we knew it would end. But it didn't. I'm just wondering, I didn't put this in, but I'm just wondering now, how many of us were sat there waiting for midnight? I have to think, actually, looking back at midnight, we were living in Boston Spa at the time, and there were so many parties and so many actual people letting off fireworks at that time. You could be forgiven that the end of the world had come. Everybody was competing. But it didn't happen, and computers did not crash. In America, well, it's often in America, isn't it? But in America, there was an infamous Christian radio broadcaster called Harold Camping, who was so sure that Christ would return to earth on May the 21st, 2011. And he gathered around him many, many people who believed in his preaching. And some of them went out and they sold all their possessions because they believed in what he said. May the 21st, 2011. It came And it went. Sadly, Harold Camping isn't here anymore, but he didn't die on May the 21st, 2011. He died a few years later, and I'm not quite sure what he thought about his predictions after that. And then there was the doomsday message generated when someone looked at the Mayan calendar and realized that there were no dates after September the 3rd, 2012. I'm really glad it happened on September the 3rd because it meant that Linda and I managed to celebrate our wedding anniversary the day before. The fact that the 5,125-year-old Mayan calendar came to an end on September the 3rd, 2012, didn't mean the end of the world. It meant that the Mayan calendar ended on the September the 3rd, 2012, and nothing else. And as we know, the world did not end that day. And it hasn't ended yet. My point is, because I could give you lots more examples up to the present day, but my point is that we often hear of people who believe they know when the world is going to end. And sadly, some people look to the Bible and find images and passages that reinforce their point. And it's actually easy to do this. It's easy to look at the Bible and prove absolutely anything almost that you want to do. And it's actually called proof texting. Taking words out of one Bible passage, adding them to another Bible passage, or other authoritative statements that support whatever they, or even you if you want to do it, want to say. I've not done it in this sermon, by the way. But let us be clear. There is no way to read or study or interpret the Bible that allows you or permits you to do this if you want to read it properly. We need, of course, to remember that we have had wars in our world from time immemorial, and these could be seen as signs. But about 15 years ago, a group of academics and historians compiled some startling information. And I'm now going to share that with you. Since 3600 BC, that's 3,600 years before Jesus the Christ was born, the world has known only 292 years of peace. During the past 5,600 years, there have been 14,351 wars and conflicts in which 6.64 billion people have been killed. Wars are not new. Since Cain and Abel, men and women have fought to gain what they didn't have, annihilate entire cultures they did not like, or right a wrong as they saw it. The Old Testament is full of stories of bloody wars, sanctioned by God. But Jesus told us that the end is still to come. In this gospel reading we've just heard from Mark, Jesus was trying to tell the disciples of the things to come. They'd been in Jerusalem, perhaps for the first time for many of them, and they've seen the magnificent temple built by Herod. And you would imagine that most of these itinerant disciples were not familiar with the large cities and the grandeur of massive buildings by their reaction. And the temples must, for them, have seemed amazing. It was built with huge white stones, some as long as 70 feet and weighing as much as 100 tons. When viewed from a distance, from the Mount of Olives perhaps, where Jesus and his disciples were sitting, it glowed with plates of gold shining brilliantly in the Jerusalem sun. The disciples, and anyone seeing it, couldn't help but be impressed. But for the Jews, the temple was more than just a building, more than a place of worship. It was the center and anchor of their life. It provided identity, structure, and meaning. For the Jewish people, the temple was literally God's home. But as the disciples commented on the temple and its magnificence, Jesus replied, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left among another. Each one will be thrown down." And the temple of Jerusalem was indeed destroyed, except for one wall, the Wailing Wall. This wall that is hallowed shrine for all Jews to this day. Put it on your bucket list. Read the front of the news bulletin. Not now, but read it. I've been. It's fantastic. You've got to do it once in your life. We need to remember that the book of Mark was written just about the time that the temple was destroyed. It was written for a community who were trying to figure out how to live between Jesus' resurrection and his return, or the end of the world. Jesus was again speaking to his disciples and to us with an analogy. He wasn't talking about the end of the world, but rather how to live when our worlds collapse. As Richard Rohr, a Franciscan monk, teaches in his book Falling Upward, it is in crisis that we learn life's greatest lessons. It's from disappointment and struggle that we learn what is truly important. It is in meeting failure and loss that we find the richest contents for our lives. It is at difficult times that we realize that our soul within is greater than our earthly bodies. But we do want answers, don't we? We do want to know. We have an inbuilt need to want to know what's going to happen next. Like the disciples, we want to know every detail about when and how our future will take place. The disciples hoped for a way to save themselves as they interpreted the signs of the time. And so do we. So how do we wait for the end of the world? How do we live in the time between birth and death? How do we live in a time when chaos surrounds us? How do we live in a world that pulls us apart rather than pulling us together? Well, first, look around and see what we have, not what we do not have. We're being sold false promises every day. If we have a new car, okay, I've just bought one, sorry. If we have a new car, a bigger house, a thinner body, a younger face, or a better job, life will be better. It's likely that those people who sell this to us are the false prophets that Jesus warned us about. And these false prophets deceive us. They make us fearful of what lies ahead. They make us unhappy with who we are. They let us allow other people to define, and even worse, limit us. Secondly, just take time to think about what you really value in your life. And thirdly, accept that life goes on. Good and bad happens. People are born, grow up and die. And the circle of life continues. And in the meantime, we need not live in uncertainty, because no matter what happens, no matter when it happens, we are loved beyond measure. We are the creations of a forgiving Creator. On this life's journey, in joyous and in difficult times, we are God's own. We come from God, and to God we shall return. No matter what happens, we can depend on love to see us through. The end is not the end. The end is only the beginning. We need to fill our lives with love, forgiveness, compassion, and beauty of God. Revelation 21, verse 5. Behold, I shall make all things new. Let us allow God to do this. And let us live our lives as he would have us live them. Ready to accept the end times when they come, but not wasting our lives looking for the signs of the end. Amen.